Namaste to one and all. Welcome to Śabda-yoga. In this episode, we will be looking at the analysis of the term Cittam based on textual occurrences, lexical entry, and also the etymological derivation. Now, first we get into the etymological derivation of the word chitta. When we see this, we see that when the root chit plus it is when the suffix ta is added to it, then we get the word chittam. To the root chit, when the suffix ta is added, we get the word chittam. The meaning of the root is chiti samjnane. Samjnana is the meaning, which means to perceive, to think. So that's the root word chit. And then the kta, the suffix kta, is used to indicate instrumentality. So that by which we perceive or we think. So that becomes chitta. And so the derivative statement for this, based on this etymological derivation, would be chetayati anena iti chittam. That by which one knows, one perceives, one thinks, that is chittam. So this is the etymological derivation. Now let's get into the lexical entry. So what does the Lexicon Amarakosha give us for the word chittam? What is the entry? Chittam tucheto hridayam swantam hrin manasam manaha. So we see various synonyms of chittam being enlisted in this Amarakosha entry, where we see chitta, chetas, hridaya, swanta, hrit, manasa, manas. So these 7 words are synonymous. So that is the entry that the lexicon gives. So it is interesting to note that in various yogic texts, in certain places, these words are used as synonyms, and in certain places, they are given specific meanings. Particular meanings are adduced to each of these terms. For example, hridaya may mean something, manas may mean some other aspect or activity of the mind. So, generally in Sanskrita, we see these are the synonyms of the same entity, the inner instrument of perception and thinking. Now, we go to the entries in the texts. So it's very interesting to note that in all these 3 texts that we are going to see, be it Yogasūtra, be it Bhagavad-gītā, or in Haṭha-yoga-pradīpikā, there is plenty of references to the word Cittam. The usage, very interesting usages are there for the word Cittam. So we see in Yogasūtra, in the 4 chapters that we have, the 4 padas, in about 20 sutras, we find the usage of the term chitta, either as an individual term or a compound term, and so on, or a term with adjectives, etc. So in the first pada, we have 4 occurrences of the term. So we see yoga chitta vritti nirodha. The definition of yoga itself is based on chitta vritti nirodha. And then we find chitta vikshepas, yadhisthana samshaya, the 9 chitta vikshepas, or the distractions of the mind. So there you find the usage of the term chitta vikshepas. And then you see later in the chapter, chitta prasadana, maitri karuna mudito pekshanam, sukha dukkha punya punya vishayanam, bhavanatah chitta prasadanam. So there also the word chitta is used. And then you see in the same series, vitaraga vishayam va chittam. The mind shall focus upon a dispassionate mind of a sage, workings of the mind of a dispassionate sage, then it becomes calm. It attains chitta prasadanam. So in that context also, in the first pada, we find the usage of the term chitta. Then in the second pada, there is just 1 occurrence to the word chitta, where we see it is part of the definition of pratyahara. Swabhishaya samprayoge sati chitta swarupanukaraiva indriyanam pratyaharaha. The withdrawal of the senses or the non-association of the senses with their respective objects, and as if the sense organs, they follow the activities of the controlled, focused mind. So that is defined as pratyahara. So as part of the definition of pratyahara also, we find, so it is not limited only to the sense organs. When we speak about pratyahara, it is about the chitta also, because the term chitta is used there and the role of chitta is there in pratyahara. So, and then we go to the third pada, where we see the word again used in 7 sutras. So, for example, we see that chittasya dharana, deshabandhas chittasya dharana. There again, the binding of the mind in a particular place, in the defined place, that is dharana. As part of the definition of dharana, we find chitta, and then vyuthana. Then you find the chitta parinamas. So there also you find the word. So in 3 sutras, the nirodha parinama, samadhi parinama, and ekagrata parinama of the mind. So the changes that happen in the mind during nirodha, samadhi, and ekagrata are defined in sutras 9, 11, and 12. So chittasya samadhi parinama, chittasya nirodha parinama, chittasya ekagrata parinama. So in that context also, the subtle changes of the mind in the yogic states like nirodha, samadhi, and ekagrata. So in that context also you find the usage of the term chitta, and then you find later in the siddhis portion, when the siddhis are the supernatural powers of the mind. So there also you find the expression chitta parachitta jnanam, chitta samvit, chittasya parasharira veshaha, the mind entering into another body, knowing about the mind of the others. So all these siddhis are also associated with chitta, which can be seen here. So these are the occurrences of the term chitta and the context of their occurrence in the 3rd chapter. Now again, the most highest occurrence we see in the 4th chapter, where we find in 9 sutras the term chitta appears. So in sutras 4 and 5 we find the nirmana chitta and the nayaka chitta. So your mind, this is also part of discussion on the siddhis only, or the possibilities with the mind. One mind which creates and manages so many chittas for one particular atma. So that is nayaka chitta, and the chitta which is fashioned out for the experience of one particular siddha purusha. So they are nirmana chittas. So the created, artificially created minds are nirmana chittas, and then there are so many nayaka chitta. That is, there are many nirmana chittas, and it is managed by one nayaka chitta. So these references about the possibilities with mind, it is not that one body, one mind stays with one body. So this one mind can create many minds, and it can manage many minds for this one particular consciousness. These possibilities are also mentioned, interesting to note, in the 4th chapter. Then we find a list of expressions here on chitta, which is to establish the nature of chitta, and it's to establish, it also has a purpose to establish that there is consciousness apart, away, and beyond the chitta. So a series of sutras like Vastu Samyepi Chitta Bheda Tayor Vibhakta Panthaha. The first attempt that Patanjali makes is that it is not that everything is just an appearance in the mind alone. No, the external mind, the external world as a reality exists, and the mind is separate. So the object may be the same, but the perceiving minds may be different. So hence the self-same object can be perceived in so many ways. So hence the object is separate, and then the chitta is separate. It is not that everything is chitta alone, as the Buddhists would want to have it. So it is not that everything is just one chitta. No, there are so many chittas and so many ways of perceiving objects outside. So there is a clear distinction between the objects of world outside and then the chitta which perceives it. And then nacha ekachitta tantram vastu tad apramanakam tada kim syat. Again, the next occurrence here, we see that there is the objects are not dependent on the chitta. The objects are independent of the chitta. Even if the chitta is not perceiving the object, it would still exist. So all these discussions about the reality of the world outside, which is the yoga shastra point of view, yoga philosophy standpoint, is that the world outside is not just an appearance. It is real, it is a separate, and it is different from the chitta as such. So all these are being established through the sutras like vastu samyepi chitta bhedat, and then nacha eka chitta tantram vastu, and then the nature of the mind is also mentioned here later when it says chittasya vastu jnata jnatam. So sometimes the chitta knows an object, gets into touch with the object. Sometimes it does not know the object. Hence, it can be from this it becomes evident that so the chitta gets in touch with the object, which means that the object is something outside. So when it gets into touch with the object, it knows the object. When it does not get in touch with the object, it does not know the object. This again establishes the chitta is different, the world outside is different. But again, there is something beyond the chitta. And again, further, chitta is not the be-all and end-all of our existence. There is consciousness beyond the chitta. That is also established. While the chitta is flickering, means when it gets in touch with the object, it knows the object. When it does not get in touch with the object, it does not know. But whereas consciousness is always there. Sada jnataha chitta vrittayaha tat prabhoho purushasya aparinamitva. So the consciousness is always in touch with the chitta, and hence it always knows. There is no point when the chitta and its activities are not known by the consciousness, because it is by the reflection of the consciousness, it is by the connection of the consciousness that the chitta operates. Hence, as the chitta flickers, means when it gets connected with the object, yes, there is light, there is knowledge. When it is not connected about that object, there is no knowledge. It is not in the case of Chaitanya or consciousness. That way, it is always connected. So it is through Chaitanya that the chitta operates and the chitta connects with things outside. So it is unflickering, steady. So sada tat prabho purushasya aparinamitvam, unchanging, steady, stable consciousness is there, which is behind and beyond the chitta. So that is also established through this sutra. And then again, the Buddhists want to say, would not want to easily give in, and they would want to say that why would you want a consciousness, something different, to be beyond and behind and above the chitta? Why shall the chitta not be observed by another chitta? Chittantara drishye buddhi buddhe ati prasanga. So the problem in that also is brought out. If this chitta, which is perceiving the object, is watched by another chitta, and so there is a record of the activity of this chitta, by going by the same principle, so this chitta which is watching the other chitta should also be watched. So in this way, it will be an infinite regress. Buddhi buddhe ati prasangaha smriti sankara. So there will be an infinite regress, ati prasangaha, smriti sankarascha. When in the context of recollection, what will be recollected? There will be a lot of confusion. So hence, it is not that one chitta is watched by another chitta, the activities of another, one chitta is watched by other chitta. No, all the activities of chitta happens in the light of the consciousness. So that is the philosophy of Yogasūtra about the mind and the consciousness, which is brought about by Sutra 21. Later, again, though there are limitations to the chitta, it is also stated that the chitta is sarvartham. Drashtradrishyo paraktam chittam sarvartham. It is the chitta which is both in touch with the objects outside and which is always watched by the consciousness. So it appears as if it is everything. Means it has the objects of the world and it receives the reflection of the consciousness. So the Buddhists as if they feel that chitta is everything. So the objects are also there in the chitta, and then the consciousness is also reflected. The awareness is also there in the chitta. So they probably are misled to believe that as chitta is in touch with, it's a unique entity, as it is in touch with the objects outside and also with the consciousness, they probably fallaciously consider that there is nothing outside and there is only chitta all around. And they also consider chitta to be endowed with awareness, and awareness is not separate from chitta. So all these problems are there to the Buddhists, whereas it's very clear that the objects, going by these discussions, the objects outside are independent and chitta is in the middle, and then the chitta operates in the light with the reflection of the consciousness. So this is the Yogasūtra philosophy standpoint, that objects outside are real, there is the chitta in between, and there is consciousness which is beyond. So the awareness of the consciousness which is beyond that. So that is clarified again in Sutra 23 when it said Cittam Sarvartham Drashtra Drishya Uparaktam, which gets connected with the Drashta and the Drishyam. And then finally, Visheshadarishinaha Atmabhava Bhavana Nivritti Tada Vivekanimnam Kaivalya Pragbharam Chittam. When there is no doubt which remains about the nature of the pure consciousness and awareness, then the chitta turns towards the state of Kaivalya. So it gets oriented towards the state of Kaivalya. So that is the highest state, or towards the highest state, the chitta makes a definite turn. So that is indicated after all these discussions in 26. So that very defining change that chitta takes towards Kaivalya, that happens after analyzing, after discussing all these aspects about chitta. So hence these are the references, these are the 20 important sutras in the whole Yogasūtra. I feel that if these 20 sutras are studied, then all aspects that Patanjali wants to convey, Sage Patanjali wants, Acharya Patanjali wants to convey about the mind, because yoga is all about the mind. So the essence of Yogasūtra can be understood by looking at these references on these 20 sutras that discuss about the term chitta. So we move on to the Bhagavad-gītā, where again we find a lot of references to the word chitta. Sri Krishna is also very fond of the term chitta. So we find in the 4th chapter, Ekaki Yata Chittatma. So there, Yata Chittatma. So the one who has controlled or restrained his mind. So that reference is found. And then in chapter 6, so we find in about 6 verses. So that's the Haṭha-yoga, where there is a lot of references about chitta. We see Yata Chitta, Mat Chitta, Viniyatam Chittam, and Niruddham Chittam. So all these interesting expressions about the controlled mind, the restrained chitta, the regulated chitta, the chitta which is surrendered to the divinity, Mat Chitta. You can also observe that the expression Mat Chitta, Mat Chitta, means a chitta, a mind which is focused on me. Me here means Krishna, means the mind which has surrendered to Bhagavan Krishna, a mind which is oriented to Ishvara Pranidhana. So that is discussed as Mat Chitta, and Krishna uses the term Mat Chitta a lot of times in Bhagavad-gītā. And then in the 12th chapter, we see there is a lot of methods, alternative methods and steps given to regulate the mind, to focus the mind. Atha chittam, to attain chitta samadhanam. Atha chittam samadhatum nashaknoshi mayisthiram abhyasa yogena tato mamichhaptum dhananjaya. So practice the abhyasa yoga and abhyasayatya samarthosi mat karma paramo bhava madartham api karmani kurvan siddhim avapsyasi Haṭha-yoga-pradīpikā kartum madhyogam-ashritaha sarva karma phalatyagam tatah kuru yatatmavan. So various methods, abhyasa yoga, karma phalatyaga, doing actions for the Bhagavan and also renouncing the results of the action and surrendering the results of action through Bhagavan. So all these are the graded methods to attain chitta samadhanam given by Sri Krishna in 12th chapter. Then we see in the 13th chapter, we find one more reference, Samachittatvam, beautiful expression of Amanitvam, Adambitvam, in the series of various gunas that are mentioned, we see asaktihi, anabhishwangaha, putradara grihadishu, nityancha samachittatvam, always being level-minded, always having a mind which has equipoise. So in the list of gunas which are given in the 13th chapter, etad jnanam iti proktam. So this is the real knowledge, or these are the steps which will lead us to the real knowledge. So towards that, samachittatvam is also a quality that is mentioned. And then in the 16th chapter, we find as an asuri guna, in the context of that, we find the chitta vibhranta, aneka chitta vibhranta. So the demonic quality, one of the qualities is deluded by various thoughts. So the thoughts dragging into various directions, a person who runs behind the mind which is drawn to various directions, he is aneka chitta vibhranta, and that is an asuri quality. And so the point is, one should be focused in one's pursuit. Focus is a quality which is a daivi shakti, whereas aneka chitta vibhrantata is an asuri sampat. Then again in 18th chapter, we find finally again towards the end, while Krishna speaks about various methods or uses chitta in various contexts, finally Krishna in 18th chapter says the same word machitta. So machitta sarvadurgani tarati. So a person who has surrendered to me, to Bhagavan, to Ishvara, which is called as Ishvara Pranidhana in Yogasūtra, so he overcomes all the difficulties in life. So that's how Bhagavad-gītā ends towards the 18th chapter again. That is where Krishna wants our chitta to be towards the end of the text itself. So these are the various references towards the word chitta in Bhagavad-gītā. Now moving on to Haṭha-yoga-pradīpikā, we find about 19 references to the term chitta in this text. So in the first chapter, we see Shavasanam Shrantiharam Chitta Vishranti Karakam. So Shavasana, the practice of asana. So in the practice of, as a component of the concluding posture in asana, which is Shavasana, so it relaxes the mind. So even in asana practice, the role of chitta has been brought out by this reference, and then how the mind has to be relaxed at the end of the asana practice, that is indicated. Then of course in pranayama chapter there is a lot of reference to chitta, where we see the popular reference chale vate chalam chittam, in the same way, in the same tone we see yavad baddho maruddehe yavat chittam nirakulam. So as long as the breath and the mind are restrained, so there will be happiness. And then in the context of Brahmari also, as the outcome of Brahmari is spoken as chitte jata kachid ananda leela. So a dance of bliss is experienced during the practice of Brahmari. And then kumbhaka pranarodhante kurya chittam nirashrayam. So this is a very important idea which is given towards the end of the second chapter, where in kumbhaka, while the kumbhaka is getting completed, so how should the mind be? Where should one keep the mind? Kuryat chittam nirashrayam. One should not entertain any thought. Allow the mind to be still, just like the prana has been stilled by the kumbhaka, the inhale and the hold. So during that time, the mind should not be employed into thinking this and thinking that. Just allow the mind not to get in touch with anything. So that technique. So if the mind has to attain the peace and calmness, then at the end of the pranayama practice, especially at the end of kumbhaka, one should allow the mind not to get in touch with any object. That's a very minute technique that is given as part of pranayama, which comes out only when we start analyzing the term, the appearance of chitta in pranayama. In chapter 3, we find tada chittam niralambam. So when the kundalini is awakened and the prana enters sushumna, the mind becomes free from the touch of any objects. So it becomes still. So that is mentioned here. And then chittam charati kheyasma. Jihva charati khegata. So that is why khechari. While defining the khechari mudra, So if the chitta enters into the space in between the eyebrows during the practice, it should be there. So hence, ke charati, kha. The chitta enters into the kha. Kha means the space in between the eyebrows. Hence it is kechari mudra. And the tongue also follows it there. So hence it is called as kechari mudra. In that context also we find the reference. And then during the Vajroli mudra description also, we find chittayattam nrunam shukram. So it is depending upon the nature of the quality of the mind, the shukra or the semen or the sensory control, the control over sensual activities is entirely dependent upon the mind. So if the mind is controlled, all the sensual activities can also be kept under check. So in that sense also we find references to the word chitta in the mudra chapter. And as you can see, there are a lot of references to the term chitta in the 4th chapter, predictably, because it's all about samadhi. So hence about 11 references we find in 11 verses we find the reference to word chitta. So chitte samatvam apanne. So when the prana enters into sushumna, the chitta attains a state of equipoise. And then hetu dvayam cha chittasya vasana cha samiranaha. So there are two things which keeps the chitta active, or which cause the chitta to remain active: vasana and samirana. Vasana is the subliminal impressions that we have, and the thoughts, etc., the impressions, the samskaras that we have. And then samiranaha is the breath. So tayor vinashta ekasmin tau dvavapi vinashyataha. If one is subdued or controlled, then the chitta, the vasana, all this can be managed. If the breath is managed, then the chitta and the vasanas can be managed. Or if vasana is under control by various practices of dhyana, then chitta and the prana will get under control. So in this way, there is a triad of chitta, vasana and samirana. Samirana is vayu. So that is indicated here. There also we find the word chitta. And then in Shambhavi mudra also, antarlakshya vilina chitta pavanaha yogi yada vartate. So because the yogi has an antarlakshya, a lakshya or an object of focus within. So what happens? His breath and also his chitta's activities, they dwindle in the process of Shambhavi mudra. There also the word chitta is used. And then bhavet chitta layanandaha. Though Kechari mudra and Shambhavi mudra have different approaches, but the chitta laya anandaha, the absorption of the mind by these two practices, chitta laya, which is caused by Kechari and Shambhavi mudra, that generates a sense of ananda. So that is same. The outcome, though the process of Kechari and Shambhavi mudra may be different, the outcome that chitta laya ananda, chitta laya ananda, that is the same. So the bliss that is generated by the absorption of the mind, which is the outcome of both Kechari and Shambhavi mudra, they are one and the same. So Atmarama affirms that in verse 38. And then chittanandam tada jitva sahajananda sambhavaha. So the mind, the bliss in the mind is experienced by nadānusandhāna. Even that has to be transcended. In the practice of nadānusandhāna, the mind becomes blissful and happy. Should we stay with that? No. That should also be transcended if one wants to reach the state of samadhi. That is indicated here. And then eki bhutam tada chittam. So the 4th state, arambha, parichaya, ghata and nishpatti. Arambha, ghata, parichaya and nishpatti. These are the 4 states. In the 4th state, the mind becomes one with nada. So that is indicated in verse 77. There also you find the word chitta. Tatra chittam sthiri kuryat. So there are 2 types of nadānusandhana which is mentioned. The second type of nadānusandhana by just closing the ears in Shanmukhi mudra and focusing on various sounds. So whichever sound is heard, whether it is gross or subtle, one should allow the mind to stay with the sound. So that nada, it should be nada. So there the mind should be stabilized, the chitta should be stabilized in the nada that is observed in the second method of practice of nadānusandhana. That is indicated. There also you find the word nada, chitta here. And then nada asaktam tatha chittam vishayan nahi kankshate. In 90th verse again, we find the mind which is interested, the mind which is captivated by nada, it doesn't go into the objects of the senses. So that is indicated the efficacy or the greatness of nada anusandhana. There also you find the chitta. Nade pravartitam chittam, nadena saha liyate. The mind which has get conjoined, the mind that gets combined, gets immersed with nada, when the nada dies down, the mind also loses its existence. As if it loses its existence, and the state of samadhi is achieved, and that is through paravairagyam. So that is indicated by, that is mentioned in the verse 98. So nade pravartitam chittam, that expression could be found there. And then piliyate nishchitam chittamarutau. Again, this is by the practice of nadanusandhana. It is not the chitta only which is taken care of, even the prana is also taken care of. Viliyete nishchitam chittamarutau. Chitta and maruta, the prana, they also get absorbed in the process. And then 110, the last reference with regard to chitta in Haṭha-yoga-pradīpikā, 4th chapter, 110th verse, chittam na suptam no jagrat smriti vismriti varjitam. What is the beautiful state of samadhi? That is described here in terms of chitta. The chitta in state of samadhi is neither asleep nor awake. Na suptam, no jagrat. It is neither asleep nor awake, but it is aware. And then smriti vismriti varjitam. It neither remembers nor does it forget. All this point to pure awareness. So that is the pure awareness that will be reflected or experienced in chitta when it reaches the state of samadhi. So beautiful expression here of samadhi in terms of chitta is found here in verse 110. Normally, chitta is associated with either nidra or kind of awaking or kind of dreaming. So a state where it is neither asleep nor awake in the sense of getting in touch with objects outside. It is established in its pure awareness. And then neither does it remember, neither does the samskaras have a say in a chitta with samadhi. So it doesn't have that is a smriti. It doesn't recollect the past or the past memories do not come up. They don't pop up. So they also are subdued, and it neither forgets itself. Its existence is in the form of awareness. So it is neither vismriti nor smriti. It is pure awareness. So samadhi in terms of chitta is also expressed towards the excellent verse that we find, a very insightful verse that we find towards the end of Haṭha-yoga-pradīpikā. This is the state that we aspire to attain, and that is the state of swasthya, healing or being healthy. So neither smriti nor vismriti, neither asleep nor awake, pure state of awareness. So as a culmination to the references of textual occurrences, we find a wonderful reference. So thus these are the beautiful, wonderful textual references. Enormous, there are so many references are there in each of the texts that we have taken up for discussion, but all these are insightful. So just to sum up what we have seen, all these references, we see that the states and acts of the mind in terms of vritti, etc., we saw, and categories of mind, daiva, asura minds, so how it operates, how the chitta has a role there, and then how the chitta's attributes are to be absorbed in a asuri mind, etc., and then what influences the mind, especially prana, and then changes, subtle changes in the mind, nirodha, samadhi, ekagrata, parinamas, powers of the mind, parachitta jnanam, chitta sambhita, parasharira aveshaha, all these possibilities, potentials, the great powers of the mind, and then tools to regulate the mind. So in pranayama we find chitta, in pratyahara we find chitta, in dharana chitta is mentioned, dhyana chitta is mentioned, nadanusandhana chitta is mentioned, and machittaha. In Ishvara Pranidhana also, it is all about chitta only. So even in asana, in shavasana, we saw chitta. So right from asana to Ishvara Pranidhana, and in samadhi also. And lastly, we saw the definition of samadhi also in terms of chitta. So beginning from asana till samadhi, in all these there is the role of chitta, and that is brought about by all these references. And then we saw very beautiful states of mind. Normally in psychology, we find the mind is an afflicted entity. It is a problematic entity. The problems of the mind are to be solved. But some positive states of mind are mentioned. The references are Chittananda, Chitta Prasadana, Samachitta. All these are wonderful expressions, positive states of mind. They are also mentioned. They also emerge through this discussion. And finally, we also saw that Chitta is not the ultimate entity. And there is something, there are limitations to Chitta. Of course, Chitta has, though it is connected with outside and also the consciousness, a transcendental entity beyond Chitta exists. That is consciousness. So that comes through all these references from the yoga text. So such wonderful range of ideas on Chitta can be gained from these references. So it could be understood that be it Haṭha-yoga-pradīpikā. Normally by Haṭha-yoga-pradīpikā, people think that it is practice of asanas alone. As we have seen from the enormous lot of references, right from asana, through pranayama, through mudras, and also samadhi, we find the role of chitta in every place, very crucial role. So be it the Haṭha-yoga, be it the karma bhakti jnana, dhyana yogas of the Gita, be it the Patanjala yoga with abhyasa vairagya, kriya yoga and ashtanga yoga, everywhere chitta is the central entity that emerges through this discussion or these textual analysis. And then one limitation has to be said about this study is that initially a reference from the lexicon was given. Cittam tu cheto hridayam swantam hrin manasam manaha. So there are various synonyms to the word chitta. Cittam, chetaha, hridayam, swantam, hrit, manasam, manaha. So 7 synonyms are there, which denotes to the mind and the various activities of mind. Even the word like buddhi, etc. are there. So among the various words that denote the mind, only one word, that is chittam, was seen when we explore this yoga literature for the expressions chetas, hridaya, swanta, hrit, manasa, manas, etc. We may get more inputs and more aspects of the mind would be revealed. So as we saw, chitta is just the tip of the mind. So if we these references on chitta itself is quite a lot of references we see, but is it the entirety of the understanding of yoga texts, especially these texts on chitta? No, because there are other words like chetas, hridaya, hrit, manas, etc. Only by exploring those we can get a complete picture about the idea of mind as expressed in our yoga literature. Only a portion, a dimension, and also the potential of yoga texts about the knowledge of mind has been brought about by this humble attempt to of this Śabda-yoga, where we have seen the etymology, the lexicon, and also the textual occurrences for the word chitta in connection in the context of yoga. So thank you very much. Namaste.